I just need to get in. It's already late.
You're blocking the entrance. It's HOA policy.
I'm moving in. This is Akavin.
Not in that truck, you're not. Look at the rules.
The moment the HOA president called the cops on me, she thought she was protecting her neighborhood. 3 hours later, she was standing on land she didn't legally own. The rain had just started when my moving truck rolled into Blackwater Cove. Thin, cold rain tapping against the metal roof of the cab, fog hanging low over the lake behind the neighborhood like smoke drifting across dark water. Wet cedar and muddy shoreline smell carried through the open window of my pickup while the tires crunched over the gravel driveway for the first time. I remember thinking the place looked peaceful, expensive, quiet, controlled. The kind of lakeside subdivision where every mailbox matched and every porch light glowed the same warm yellow after sunset. Then I saw the white Lexus SUV parked sideways across my driveway before the movers could even unload the first couch. A woman stepped out slowly holding a leather folder against her chest like she'd rehearsed the moment. White blazer, pearl earrings, blonde hair barely moving in the lake wind. The kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "You must be Mr. Walker," she said. "I'm Melissa Whitmore, HOA president." One of the movers muttered under his breath and killed the truck engine. The whole cul-de-sac had gone weirdly quiet. Rain tapping gutters, wind moving through pine trees. Somebody across the street pretending to check their mail while watching us. Melissa glanced at the moving truck, then at the fishing boat hitched behind my pickup. "Before you unload," she said calmly, "you'll need to sign the community compliance agreement." I took the envelope from her and looked at the top page. HOA bylaws, monthly dues, property restrictions, boat usage limitations, exterior paint approvals. I looked back up at her. "I'm not in your HOA." The smile stayed on her face for maybe 2 seconds longer than normal. Then it hardened. "Everyone on this shoreline is in the HOA. County listing says otherwise." The silence after that felt heavy. Cold morning air drifting between us, while rainwater rolled off the gutters onto the driveway in steady little streams. Melissa tilted her head slightly, like she was talking to a child. "You really should be careful before embarrassing yourself in front of your new neighbors." One of the movers looked away immediately. Across the street, another garage door opened halfway. People were watching now. You could feel it. Small-town lake community energy. Everybody wanting drama, but pretending they didn't. Melissa stepped closer and lowered her voice. "The last owner caused problems too. He didn't last." Then she pulled out her phone and dialed non-emergency dispatch right there in front of me. "Hello?" "Yes?" she said loudly enough for the street to hear. "I need an officer at lot 14 immediately. We have a trespassing and compliance issue." That got everyone's attention. One neighbor actually stopped walking his dog. Another woman came out holding a coffee thermos just to listen. And Melissa loved it. You could see it in her face. That polished little expression like she was finally back in control of her stage. I leaned against my truck quietly while rain drummed against the moving van roof. "You really calling the cops because I won't join your HOA?" I asked. Melissa smiled again. "No, Mr. Walker. I'm calling because people like you always think rules don't apply to them. If you've ever dealt with somebody drunk on tiny amounts of power, you already know the tone she used. Calm, smug, public, designed for humiliation. Comment below with your city and tell me if your neighborhood has somebody exactly like this, because the next thing that happened made the entire street go silent." 20 minutes later, a county deputy stepped out into the rain, looked at Melissa's paperwork, then looked at my property listing on his tablet. And for the first time all morning, somebody's confidence cracked. Deputy Ryan Cole stood there in the rain for another few seconds, staring at the county parcel map on his tablet, while Melissa slowly lost color in her face. Not panic yet, just irritation. The kind people get when reality refuses to cooperate with the version they rehearsed in their head. Rainwater dripped from the edge of her blazer sleeve, while the lake wind pushed fog across the shoreline behind the houses. Finally, the deputy looked up at her and said, very carefully, "Ma'am, I cannot enforce HOA compliance on a property that may not legally fall inside the association boundary." You could almost hear the neighborhood inhale at the same time. Melissa forced a small laugh. "There has to be some mistake." Deputy Cole shrugged lightly. "Could be. But this looks like a county civil matter, not a criminal trespassing issue." The silence after that hit harder than yelling would have. One of the movers coughed awkwardly. Across the street, the woman with the coffee thermos lowered it slowly without taking her eyes off Melissa. She hated that. You could tell immediately. People like Melissa could handle conflict. What they could not handle was losing control in public. "So you were just leaving?" she asked the deputy. "I am saying he can move into his house." She turned toward me then, smiling again, but now the smile looked tight around the edges. "This is not over, Mr. Walker." I remember watching her Lexus pull away through the rain while thunder rolled somewhere across the lake. The moving crew started unloading again, but the mood had changed. Every neighbor who passed the driveway suddenly found a reason not to make eye contact. One older guy backing down his fishing dock actually stopped halfway through tying his boat just to stare toward my house. That first night, the fog got so thick over the water I could barely see the end of the shoreline from the back porch. Rain hit the metal awning above the patio in slow, uneven bursts while I sat there drinking burnt gas station coffee from a paper cup and trying to convince myself I had not made a mistake moving here. The divorce had already taken enough out of me. The last thing I wanted was another fight. Then the violations started arriving less than 12 hours later. The first notice was taped directly to my mailbox the next morning before sunrise. Unauthorized watercraft storage. Improper driveway parking. Exterior noncompliance review pending. I stood there in cold morning air reading the paperwork while my pickup sat legally parked 20 feet away on my own gravel driveway. By noon, there were 3 more notices. Somebody had even taken pictures of my moving boxes through the garage windows. Around 4 o'clock, I drove into town for supplies and stopped at a little diner near the county marina. One of those old places with wood-paneled walls and locals who all go quiet for half a second when somebody unfamiliar walks in. Rainwater dripped from my jacket while I sat at the counter nursing black coffee. The waitress leaned closer after pouring it and quietly said, "You moved into lot 14, right?" I nodded once. She glanced toward the window before lowering her voice. "Melissa already told people you were trying to sue the neighborhood." I actually laughed at that. "I moved in yesterday. Does not matter around here," she said softly. Once she decides somebody does not belong, she keeps pushing until everybody else believes it too. On the drive back, the fog over the lake had thickened again, and the shoreline looked almost black beneath the storm clouds. When I pulled into my driveway, another envelope was waiting on the front steps. This one came certified. Final warning before lien escalation. And that was the moment I realized Melissa Whitmore was not trying to enforce rules. She was trying to force me out before I figured something out. By the third morning, the entire neighborhood had started treating me like a problem nobody wanted photographed standing too close to. People still watched me constantly, but now they did it carefully, quietly, through cracked garage doors and kitchen windows glowing pale yellow against the fog rolling off the lake. Every time I stepped outside, conversations seemed to pause mid-sentence. The pressure of it settled into the property like weather. Cold, persistent, the kind that wears on you slowly. I was carrying lumber from the truck into the garage just after sunrise when I noticed somebody had zip-tied another violation notice directly onto my boat trailer overnight. This one claimed I was storing commercial recreational equipment without HOA approval. My fishing boat was 19 feet long and looked older than half the docks in the subdivision. I stood there staring at the paper while lake wind rattled the pine branches overhead and muddy water slapped quietly against the shoreline below the retaining wall. It was not really about the fines anymore. It was about control. Melissa wanted me exhausted before I had time to think clearly. Around noon, a white pickup from the utility district pulled up near the road while I was replacing loose deck boards. The driver rolled his window halfway down. "You Grant Walker?" he asked. I nodded. The guy hesitated before speaking again. "Somebody called in a complaint saying you were doing unlicensed shoreline modifications." I looked around at the single stack of cedar planks beside my porch. I replaced 2 boards. The man gave me an apologetic look. "Yeah, I figured." Before leaving, he leaned a little closer and lowered his voice. "Might want to start documenting everything." Then he drove off slowly through the gravel curve near the entrance monument. That comment stayed with me the rest of the afternoon. By evening, thunderclouds had swallowed most of the lake and rain hammered the neighborhood hard enough to blur the shoreline completely. I ended up driving into town again just to clear my head. There was a courthouse annex near the marina with one dim light still glowing through the rain, and across from it sat a little diner where older men in work jackets drank coffee in silence, while weather reports played softly from an overhead television. I took a booth near the back and spread out every notice Melissa had sent me so far. 7 violations in less than 48 hours. Every one carefully worded. Aggressive without crossing obvious legal lines. Somebody had experience doing this. A voice behind me finally said, "She is escalating faster than usual." I turned and saw a gray-haired man carrying a county survey tube under one arm. He introduced himself as Hank Blevins, local surveyor. Apparently, he had recognized my address from the notices sitting on the table. Melissa Whitmore usually waits a week before she starts threatening liens, he said while stirring cream into his coffee. You got the accelerated package. I gave a tired laugh at that. What exactly is her problem with me? Hank glanced toward the rain-covered courthouse windows before answering. Honestly, I think you scared her. That made no sense. I moved in 2 days ago. Exactly. He leaned back slightly. People who actually belong in that HOA do not question paperwork on day one. Then he casually asked something that changed the entire direction of the situation. Did you ever notice how the entrance fence curves too far east near your shoreline? I frowned immediately because I had noticed it. Barely. The decorative stone wall and cedar fencing near the subdivision entrance bent strangely toward my side of the property before reconnecting with the walking trail near the water. At the time, I assumed it was landscaping design. Hank watched my expression carefully. Yeah, he said quietly. That property line has made county people nervous for years. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake again while rainwater streamed down the courthouse steps in silver sheets. And for the first time since arriving in Blackwater Cove, I stopped feeling like a man being pushed around by a neighborhood bully. I started feeling like somebody had accidentally stepped onto a secret they were desperate to keep buried. The storm finally broke sometime after 2 in the morning. I woke up to lake wind rattling the windows hard enough to shake the bedroom walls and the sound of rainwater spilling through gutters outside like somebody pouring gravel across metal. For a few seconds I forgot where I was. Then I saw the stack of violation notices sitting on the dresser and remembered Blackwater Cove immediately. I barely slept after that. By sunrise, fog was hanging low over the shoreline again, thick enough to swallow half the fishing docks behind the neighboring houses. I stood on the back deck holding coffee and staring toward the subdivision entrance where the stone wall curved strangely near my property line. Hank's words from the diner kept replaying in my head. That property line has made county people nervous for years. Around 8:30, another certified envelope arrived. This time Melissa had escalated from fines to formal legal language. Unauthorized refusal of community compliance. Potential litigation review. Access restriction enforcement pending. The wording was polished enough to scare people who did not know better. That was the point. I sat at the kitchen counter reading the paperwork while cold gray light reflected off the lake outside. For the first time since moving in, I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically. Somebody had trained Melissa to pressure homeowners into submission long before attorneys ever got involved. The realization bothered me more than the threats themselves. About an hour later, a black SUV pulled into the driveway next door. Todd Mercer stepped out carrying a tackle box and immediately froze when he saw me outside. You could tell he had been avoiding me on purpose all week. Everybody had. But then he glanced toward Melissa's house farther down the cul-de-sac and seemed to make a decision right there. He walked over slowly through the damp grass with his hands buried in his jacket pockets. You got a minute? He asked quietly. We ended up standing near the shoreline retaining wall while muddy lake water pushed against the rocks below us. Todd kept checking over his shoulder before speaking. You should know Melissa has been telling people you are trying to challenge ownership rights in the neighborhood. I stared at him. Ownership rights? He nodded once. She said you were threatening lawsuits over the marina access trail. That stopped me cold because I had never even mentioned the trail before. Todd noticed my expression immediately. Wait, he said carefully. You did not know about the trail? The silence between us stretched longer than comfortable. Wind moved through wet cedar branches overhead, while fog drifted low across the water behind the houses. Finally, Todd pointed toward the decorative fence line near the subdivision entrance. That walking path and part of the shoreline easement cut across the edge of your lot. My stomach tightened a little. How much of it? Nobody really knows. Before I could respond, another vehicle turned into the street. White Lexus. Melissa. She slowed almost immediately after spotting Todd standing beside me. Even from 50 yards away, you could feel the irritation radiating off her through the windshield. Todd stepped back instinctively, like a teenager caught talking to the wrong crowd. That told me everything I needed to know about the social atmosphere in Blackwater Cove. Melissa parked near the curb and climbed out holding another folder against her chest. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. But this time there was tension underneath it. Todd, she said pleasantly, I thought you had the Marina Committee call this morning. Running late, he muttered. Her eyes shifted toward me without losing the smile. Mr. Walker, I strongly recommend you stop spreading misinformation to residents. I almost laughed because the accusation itself revealed panic. Calm people do not rush to control conversations they supposedly are not worried about. Interesting, I said evenly, especially since I have barely spoken to anybody here. Melissa took 2 slow steps closer. This community survives because people trust the system we built. There it was again. Not neighborhood, not residents. System. Ownership language disguised as community language. Todd looked uncomfortable enough to leave. But before he walked away, he quietly said something that changed the entire tone of the morning. You should ask the county survey office why the old shoreline markers disappeared after the developer went bankrupt. Melissa's expression cracked instantly. Just for a second. Tiny, but real. And in that exact moment, standing there in cold lake wind while thunder rolled faintly over the water again, I realized Melissa Whitmore was no longer trying to intimidate me into compliance. She was trying to keep me away from a very specific piece of history. The next 48 hours changed the emotional temperature of the entire neighborhood. You could feel it every time somebody looked away too quickly when I drove past. Every conversation stopped a little too suddenly whenever I entered a room. Blackwater Cove had started dividing itself quietly into 2 groups. People still loyal to Melissa Whitmore, and people suddenly terrified she might have lied to them for years. That fear spread faster than gossip ever could, especially in wealthy lake communities where property value meant everything. Early Friday morning, dense fog rolled off the shoreline hard enough to hide the marina docks completely. The air smelled like wet cedar and cold mud from the exposed banks near the waterline. I was outside checking the retaining wall behind my house when a dark blue county pickup eased onto my gravel driveway. Hank Blevins stepped out carrying survey stakes and a weathered tube of old plats under his arm. I figured if Melissa is escalating, he said, we should probably stop talking in diners and start looking at dirt. We spent the next hour walking the eastern edge of my property while lake wind pushed mist across the shoreline. Hank moved slowly, studying tree markers, old iron pins, and fading utility paint near the walking trail. Every few minutes he stopped and checked something against the rolled survey sheets balanced against the hood of his truck. The silence between us started feeling heavier the deeper we went. Finally, he pointed toward the stone entrance monument near the subdivision road. That structure should not be sitting there. I looked up sharply. The monument was massive. Decorative limestone. HOA signage. Landscaping lights. Blackwater Cove lettering carved into polished granite. What do you mean should not? Hank exhaled slowly. Grant, according to these original development plats, part of that entrance appears to cross onto Lot 14. My lot. For a second, all I heard was wind moving through the shoreline reeds and distant rain tapping metal boat covers down at the marina. Then another realization hit me immediately. Melissa knows this. Hank did not answer right away, which was answer enough. Around noon, the survey crew arrived to verify preliminary markers. And that was when the neighborhood started openly watching. Curtains moved. Garage doors cracked open. Golf carts slowed near the cul-de-sac entrance pretending not to stare. One older resident actually parked near the mailbox cluster just to sit there with binoculars and coffee. The social pressure had become impossible to hide now. Melissa arrived 15 minutes later wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. She stepped out of her Lexus, moving fast across the damp pavement. No smile this time. What exactly is happening on association property? She demanded. One of the surveyors calmly replied, boundary verification. Melissa ignored him completely and stared directly at me. You are creating unnecessary panic. Interesting choice of words, I said evenly. Her jaw tightened. You have no idea how much damage rumors can do to a community like this. There it was again. Damage. Not inconvenience. Not confusion. Damage. Behind her, several residents had quietly gathered near the road pretending to check mail while listening. Nobody interrupted. Nobody defended her either. Melissa noticed that too. You could actually see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Public perception was starting to slip. Then Hank drove another wooden marker into the muddy ground beside the walking trail and said something that changed the atmosphere instantly. If these original measurements hold, he said carefully, the association may have built permanent structures beyond the recorded easement line. Dead silence. Even the nearby conversation stopped. Melissa turned pale beneath the sunglasses. That is impossible. Hank shrugged lightly. County records do not care what feels impossible. The statement landed like thunder across the shoreline. One resident quietly whispered something to another. Somebody farther down the street took out a phone and started recording. And standing there in cold lake wind while fog drifted over the dark water behind us, I finally understood why Melissa had tried so hard to push me out before I unpacked a single box. Because if the survey was right, Blackwater Cove had not just built a fence across my property. They may have built their entire identity on land they never legally controlled. Melissa tried to regain control the same way people like her always do. Quiet pressure first. Institutional pressure second. Social isolation last. But by Monday morning, the entire rhythm of Blackwater Cove had shifted against her in ways she could not fully contain anymore. Rain clouds hung low over the lake again, turning the shoreline gray and metallic beneath the wind. Pickup trucks moved slower through the subdivision. Residents stopped talking openly near the mailbox cluster whenever Melissa appeared. Even the Marina Committee board outside the clubhouse had fresh papers taped over old meeting notices, like somebody was trying to rewrite the atmosphere faster than the rumors could spread. I noticed something else too. People had stopped looking at me with annoyance. Now they looked at me with curiosity, sometimes fear. That was new. Around 10 that morning, I drove into the county annex building near the courthouse square carrying copies of every violation notice Melissa had sent me. The old building smelled like wet paper, burnt coffee, and rain drifting in through cracked door seals. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the courthouse lawn outside. I sat down with a property attorney named Daniel Mercer, a calm, gray-haired man who listened more than he talked. He read through the notices slowly without interrupting once. Then he set the stack down carefully and asked, "Did they ever provide proof your parcel was formally annexed into the association?" "No, interesting." He leaned back slightly. "Because if they knowingly enforced HOA authority outside recorded boundaries, their liability exposure could become very expensive." That was the first moment the situation stopped feeling personal and started feeling structural. Insurance risk, fraud exposure, easement violations, improper assessments. Daniel was not talking about neighborhood drama anymore. He was talking about institutional damage. Outside the office windows, rain hammered against the courthouse steps while people hurried across the square, holding jackets over their heads. Daniel opened one of the plats Hank had emailed him that morning and frowned almost immediately. "This entrance monument," he said quietly, pointing toward the curved section near my lot. "Was this permitted under the association or the original developer?" "I do not know. Somebody is about to care." His tone stayed calm, but I could feel the shift underneath it. He started making calls immediately. County Planning Office, Shoreline Permit Division, Utility Easement Department. Not aggressive calls. Strategic ones. Questions designed to force paperwork into daylight. By late afternoon, Blackwater Cove was already reacting. Residents gathered near the marina, talking in low voices. Somebody leaked photos of the survey stakes into the community Facebook group. Another homeowner posted an old aerial image showing the entrance fence line shifting over the years. The comments turned ugly fast. Melissa responded with a long statement about protecting neighborhood integrity from misinformation campaigns, but the wording backfired almost instantly. Too polished, too defensive. People were starting to smell fear on her. Around sunset, I pulled back into my driveway and saw Melissa standing near the shoreline trail with 2 HOA board members beside her. Wind pushed against her blazer while dark clouds rolled low over the lake behind them. She waited until I stepped out of the truck before speaking. "You are creating liability concerns for every homeowner in this community," she said carefully. Not angry, controlled. But the cracks underneath were getting harder to hide now. "I did not build anything on disputed land," I replied. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably beside her. Melissa noticed. Her eyes flashed irritation for half a second before she forced the smile back again. "Grant," she said softly, suddenly using my first name for the first time. "There are ways to resolve these situations privately before they spiral." That line told me everything. She was no longer threatening me. She was trying to contain exposure. I looked past her toward the entrance monument glowing under landscape lights near the fog-covered road. Then maybe somebody should have resolved it before they started billing people for land they did not legally control. Nobody answered. The lake wind moved through the wet cedar trees overhead while rain started falling again in thin, cold sheets. One of the board members quietly walked back toward his car without saying another word. And standing there beside the muddy shoreline with thunder rolling across the water behind us, Melissa Whitmore finally looked less like the woman running Blackwater Cove and more like someone watching the walls crack around a secret she could no longer manage. The following Thursday night was the first HOA board meeting since the survey stakes appeared, and by 6 o'clock the parking lot outside the clubhouse already looked tense enough to feel dangerous without anybody raising their voice. Pickup trucks lined both sides of the gravel overflow lane near the Marina Trail. Residents stood in clusters under umbrellas while cold rain drifted sideways through the lake wind. Nobody laughed. Nobody lingered comfortably anymore. Blackwater Cove suddenly felt like a town waiting for a verdict. I stayed near the back entrance beside the cedar fencing while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the shoreline. Daniel Mercer stood beside me holding a leather folder thick with permit records, insurance disclosures, and shoreline easement filings. Calm, prepared, the exact opposite of the atmosphere inside the clubhouse. Through the windows, we could already hear raised voices bouncing off the hardwood walls. "You told us everything was recorded properly. What do you mean disputed access? Can the county revoke the marina permit?" Melissa's voice kept cutting through the noise, trying to regain control. Smooth at first, professional, but every answer sounded thinner than the one before it. When the doors finally opened, people filed inside without speaking to her directly. That was the first real collapse of authority. Silence. In communities like Blackwater Cove, silence could humiliate somebody faster than insults ever could. Melissa stood near the podium in a cream-colored blazer with carefully styled hair, but the performance was starting to crack around the edges. Her smile kept disappearing whenever she thought nobody was looking. Daniel and I sat quietly near the back while rain hammered against the clubhouse roof overhead. Melissa opened the meeting with prepared language about temporary misinformation regarding historical parcel alignments. But halfway through her statement, a resident named Elaine Mercer stood up abruptly. "Did you or did you not know the entrance monument crossed into private property?" Dead quiet. Melissa paused just a second too long before answering. "The board has always operated under guidance from prior development council." That was not a denial. You could feel the room notice it immediately. Somebody near the windows muttered, "Oh my God." Another resident quietly walked out shaking his head. Melissa tried to continue speaking, but the emotional balance had shifted completely now. Every sentence sounded defensive. Every explanation sounded rehearsed. Then Daniel stood up calmly and placed several documents on the front table. Insurance correspondence, shoreline permitting maps, preliminary liability assessments. If the disputed structures were knowingly maintained outside recorded easement boundaries, he said evenly, the association may face exposure beyond civil correction, especially if dues were collected under inaccurate authority assumptions. Nobody interrupted him. Even Melissa stayed silent. That silence hurt her more than confrontation would have. Residents started looking at each other differently now. Suspicion replacing loyalty in real time. One board member quietly removed his HOA badge and slipped it into his pocket without saying a word. Another avoided eye contact with Melissa entirely. Then came the moment that broke the room. Deputy Ryan Cole entered carrying a county envelope and handed it directly to the board secretary. Temporary review notice from the county planning office. Pending investigation into shoreline encroachment and access permitting irregularities. Somebody near the back whispered, "This is turning into a disaster." Melissa heard it. Everyone did. She tried one final time to regain control. "This community was built on trust," she said, voice tightening slightly. And from somewhere near the middle row, an older resident answered quietly, "That is exactly why people are upset." No yelling, no dramatic scene, just truth landing publicly in a room that no longer believed her. Melissa looked around after that and realized nobody was coming to save her authority anymore. Not the board, not the residents, not even the people who used to follow her automatically. Outside, fog drifted low across the dark shoreline while rainwater flooded the edge of the parking lot under the streetlights. And when Melissa finally walked out of that clubhouse alone with residents deliberately avoiding eye contact as she passed, she no longer looked like the woman controlling Blackwater Cove. She looked like somebody being slowly abandoned by the very community she spent years trying to dominate. By the next Tuesday morning, Blackwater Cove no longer felt like a luxury lake community. It felt like a company under investigation. Residents moved through the neighborhood quietly, watching each other more than the water. Golf carts sat abandoned near the marina trail. The clubhouse parking lot stayed half empty. Even the usual sunrise fishing crowd at the docks had disappeared beneath the heavy fog drifting across the shoreline. Nobody wanted to be publicly connected to the HOA anymore. Not until they understood how deep the problem went. I was standing near my mailbox holding a cup of coffee when 3 county vehicles rolled slowly past the entrance monument just after 8 o'clock. White utility trucks. Planning department decals. 1 sheriff unit behind them. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Curtains moved all over the subdivision. Garage doors opened halfway. Residents stepped onto porches pretending to check weather while watching county investigators unload equipment near the stone monument. Melissa arrived less than 10 minutes later, moving fast across the wet pavement in heels that kept slipping slightly on the rain-darkened curb. She spotted the sheriff vehicle and immediately changed tone. "What is all this?" she demanded sharply. A county investigator wearing a rain jacket calmly held up a folder. "We are conducting a formal boundary and permit compliance review related to reported encroachment concerns." Melissa forced a smile that looked painful now. "There is no encroachment issue." The investigator glanced toward the survey stakes still visible near the shoreline trail. "Then this should go quickly." That line spread through the neighborhood almost immediately. Within 20 minutes, residents were gathering near the Marina Road under umbrellas, whispering openly now instead of hiding it. Somebody said the county was reviewing insurance exposure. Another claimed the HOA board had approved landscaping projects outside recorded easements years earlier. Every version of the story made Melissa look worse. And for the first time since I moved in, nobody lowered their voice when she walked by. Around noon, an emergency HOA meeting was called inside the clubhouse. The atmosphere in that room felt colder than the rain outside. Nobody sat near Melissa anymore. Even board members kept physical distance between themselves and her chair at the front table. Daniel Mercer quietly handed over updated liability summaries while the sheriff deputy remained near the rear wall observing the proceedings without speaking. That alone changed the power balance completely. Institutional presence does that to people. Melissa tried to maintain authority anyway. "This association has served this community responsibly for over a decade," she said, voice tightening under pressure. "We will not allow panic and misinformation to dismantle everything we built." Then Elaine Mercer calmly stood up holding printed screenshots from old board discussions that somebody had leaked overnight. Then why were residents never informed about unresolved shoreline boundary disputes from the original developer bankruptcy? Silence. Total silence. Melissa looked toward the remaining board members for support, but nobody answered. One older man quietly removed his reading glasses and stared down at the table instead. Another woman folded her HOA agenda papers and slid them into her purse like she already wanted distance from the entire organization. Melissa's breathing visibly changed after that. Small, uneven, controlled panic trying not to become public panic. Then came the final blow. The county investigator entered carrying updated measurements and quietly informed the board that portions of the entrance monument, shoreline trail access, irrigation lines, and decorative fencing appeared to extend beyond recorded association boundaries, pending final title confirmation. One resident whispered, "You have got to be kidding me." Another muttered, "We paid dues for this?" The room emotionally collapsed after that. Not loudly, quietly. Residents stopped looking at Melissa with frustration and started looking at her with betrayal. That hurt more. You could see it on her face. Outside, rain hammered the clubhouse roof while fog swallowed the far end of the marina docks completely. And standing near the back wall watching county officials photograph structures the HOA never should have built, I realized the power dynamic had fully reversed. Melissa Whitmore was no longer the woman using institutions to intimidate me. Now the institutions themselves were walking through her neighborhood with clipboards while the entire community watched her lose control in real time. 3 weeks after the county investigation began, the rain finally stopped over Blackwater Cove. The fog still rolled across the shoreline every morning, but now the neighborhood felt emptied out in a different way. Quieter, humbled, like a place recovering from a storm nobody wanted to admit had been building for years. The final title review arrived on a cold Thursday, just after sunrise. I was sitting in my garage restoring an old cedar workbench while lake wind drifted through the open door, carrying the smell of wet shoreline mud and gasoline from the nearby marina docks. My phone rang once. Daniel Mercer. "It is official," he said calmly. "The disputed parcel chain traces back to Lot 14 exactly like we suspected." I closed my eyes for a second after hearing it. Not because I was shocked anymore. Because I was tired. Tired in the way people get after carrying tension for too long without realizing how heavy it became. Daniel continued quietly. "The entrance monument, trail easement section, decorative fencing, and portions of the irrigation corridor all extend onto land legally attached to your property." Outside, I could hear distant gulls over the lake and the soft sound of somebody backing a pickup trailer down toward the marina ramp. Life continuing while an entire neighborhood quietly absorbed what had happened. By noon, county officials posted formal correction notices near the clubhouse entrance. The HOA board voted to suspend Melissa Whitmore, pending financial and legal review before sunset. Nobody defended her publicly. That part almost felt colder than the investigation itself. In communities built on appearance, abandonment happens quietly. Residents avoided eye contact with her at the marina. Conversations stopped when she approached. One woman at the diner actually stood up and moved tables after Melissa walked in. The social authority she spent years building dissolved in less than a month once people stopped fearing her. Later that evening, I drove slowly past the entrance monument while county contractors marked sections of landscaping paint along the disputed boundary. The same stone sign Melissa once treated like the crown jewel of Blackwater Cove now sat surrounded by orange survey flags and legal notices fluttering in the wind. Irony has a strange kind of silence to it. Melissa was standing near the shoreline trail when I parked. No blazer this time. No performance. Just exhaustion. The lake behind her looked dark beneath the evening fog rolling across the water. "You could force removal of everything," she said quietly without looking at me. "Legally, yes." She nodded once, staring toward the monument lights reflecting weakly across the wet pavement. "But you are not going to." I thought about that for a moment. The harassment, the lies, the humiliation, the pressure she put on everybody around her just to maintain control. Then I looked past her toward the neighborhood itself. Kids riding bikes again near the marina road. Residents talking openly without lowering their voices. People finally breathing normally around each other. "I never wanted the neighborhood," I said calmly. "I just wanted my property back." Melissa swallowed hard after that. No comeback. No manipulation. Just the sound of lake wind moving through wet cedar trees while thunder faded somewhere far across the water. In the end, we reached a permanent easement agreement through the county. The HOA retained limited access rights to the trail and monument under revised insurance and maintenance terms, but ownership stayed with me permanently. The fines disappeared. The false violations vanished, and every resident in Blackwater Cove learned exactly how close they came to losing millions in property value because one woman believed authority mattered more than truth. A month later, I rebuilt the old gate near the shoreline trail myself. Quiet morning, fog drifting low across the lake, coffee thermos sitting on the tailgate beside my truck while sunlight finally broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. A few neighbors waved as they passed now. Todd even stopped to help carry lumber without looking nervous anymore. The tension that once lived in the neighborhood had finally burned itself out. Before heading inside, I stood near the water watching the restored shoreline disappear slowly into the morning fog. Peaceful again, almost untouched. Then my phone buzzed one last time with a county notification from Daniel. Additional records had just been uncovered involving undeclared HOA reserve transfers during Melissa's administration. I stared at the message while cold lake wind moved across the dark water. And somewhere beyond the fog-covered shoreline of Blackwater Cove, another storm was already beginning.